All right, let's look at the flyweight demo, and this will start to make a little bit more sense. Now, because of the complexity of the flyweight pattern, the setup for this demo is going to be a little bit more complicated. So let's take a minute and walk through what we've got going on so that when I start making changes, everything will make more sense. So to start with, right here, we have our task object. Now, our task object looks a little bit differently now because I'm adding some more things to it. We've got a name, we've got priority, project, user, and whether or not it's completed. There's more pieces of information on our task object. Then I've also gone a little bit deeper and actually made a task collection. So what this collection is going to do for us is I've got 3 methods, and you know that because I'm using the revealing module pattern, which says I've got an add, a get, and a get count. And what those 3 methods do, the add method adds a task to the collection. It actually will new up a task based upon some data and then add it to my tasks collection, which is really just an object. And the key is my name, the name of my task. And then get is going to go pull it back out. And then my get count I'm using just so that we can do some metrics later. So now what we're doing is I've created an array of the different types of projects. So a task can have no projects. It can have courses, it could be training, or it can be a project. So these are the different types of things that I work on a given day. I'm either working on a course, I'm doing some training, or I've got some project work going on. Priorities 1 through 5, and I've got a set of users of people I might be assigning tasks to. So these are others. So it's me, Erica, Amanda, Nathan. These are people I might assign tasks to. So the user on a task, and then completed is either true or false. And I've created in this for loop just a loop that's going to create random tasks. So I'm going to create 10,000 random tasks so that we can see what the impact is of what we're doing. I'm able to, using process.memory usage, to see how much memory we're actually using in our application. So I can do process.memory usage and get the current memory that's being used by our application. I'm pulling in the initial memory usage. Then I'm going to create 10,000 objects. And then once those 10,000 objects are created, I'm going to pull in my after memory. So we can see how much memory I've used over the course of creating 10,000 objects. And then I'm going to write out to the console how much memory we've used. It's in bytes, so let's do megabytes. And then console log, tasks, and just how many tasks we've created. So if we run this, just by doing node main.js, what you see is we've used 3 megabytes of data and we've created 10,000 tasks. If I change this to 100,000 tasks and run it again, now we've used 28 megabytes, which I've multiplied it by 10. That kind of makes sense, and created 100,000 tasks. Now let's implement the flyweight pattern on this so that we can see what impact that would have on our memory usage as we go. Now remember, I said this is only used for things that are fairly complicated, and what you might see is that when we add the overhead of the flyweight, this initial memory might go up a little bit, and the reason is I'm having very simple tasks. It's basically just a set of strings. When things get more complicated, that's when the flyweight pattern starts to make a little bit more sense. But let's run through creating a flyweight so you can see kind of how this thing works. So let's minimize our task collection here because we're not really worried about that anymore. And let's create a flyweight factory. Now really you can call this something else like subtask or, partial task or whatever you want to call it, but I'm going to be explicit and I'm actually going to call it a flyweight factory. And this is going to be a function. And realistically, we're just going to immediately execute it. So put our face in there because we want the flyweight factory to actually be the factory itself. And the flyweight factory is going to do 2 things. It's going to create a new flyweight and it's going to return a flyweight. And then we also want to put a count on it, just like we had before. So let's start by setting up our collection object, just the same way we did in our task collection. See, we've got our tasks there, so we'll do our flyweights. And then we're going to ask for a flyweight. Now, a flyweight is a subset of a task for us. So if you look at the task object, the only thing that's unique, 100% unique for a task, is this .name. Everything else is shared across one or more tasks. And we know that because down here, I'm creating random values for the rest of these things. So the only thing that's unique is the name. So everything else can become part of a flyweight. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a get function that's going to be responsible for getting a flyweight for us. And this get function is going to take all of the things that are not unique to the task. So in our case, it's the project, the priority, the user, and completed. So I'm going to pass those things in to my flyweight factory. And then my flyweight factory is going to check and see if that exists in its collection of flyweights. And if it does exist, it's going to return it. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create a new one. So right here, if not flyweight, if this collection of project, priority, user, and completed does not exist already in our flyweight collection, then we're going to create a new flyweight using those four things. And basically all that flyweight is, now we haven't created that yet, all that flyweight is those four things. So let's create that real quick. So now we've got a flyweight object that takes project, priority, user, and completed and just does this dot on them. And basically we took this dots and we moved them down. So I'm actually going to comment these out. There we go. Now, if that flyweight already exists, it's going to return the flyweight that exists already. So now what we need up here in our task is to add the flyweight. So we've removed priority, project, user, and completed, and we've added a flyweight. And basically we're just saying, hey, flyweight factory, get me a flyweight with this project, priority, user, and completed. If that flyweight exists, hand it to me. If it doesn't exist, create a new one. And that's what we're going to do. So the last thing we want to do on flyweight factory is implement a get count because we want to know how many flyweights there are. So basically what all we're doing is var get count is now a function that's going to count the flyweights. And then we're going to return an object in our revealing module pattern, our get and our get count. So up here we're using get, flyweight factory.get, and then down here we're going to add a line for get count. So right now I'm logging the number of tasks. Now let's log the number of flyweights. Real quick, copy paste flyweight factory. I didn't capitalize the W. Now let's do it. All right, now I've got 100,000 tasks, but only 160 flyweights, which means that data is shared, the priority, project, user, completed. Any combination of those things was only shared 160 times. So I've cut down the amount of memory that was used. Notice I was 28, now I'm 25, so not a huge amount, but I've cut it down. If this was maybe a little more complicated and we had more, it might be more, but right now implementing the flyweight pattern on just this simple task has saved me 3 megabytes of memory, which is pretty decent overall. If I add another 0 to this, notice I'm up to 279 megabytes of data used. And if I drop my flyweight and I go back to doing it the old way, I go from 279 megabytes used to 319 megabytes used, which on a percentage basis is actually fairly significant. So the idea of sharing pieces of a task or an object, in this case, a task, across tasks to save myself extra memory can make at least somewhat of a difference. And it depends on the complication of your object. Now, one thing we didn't do, and we could go through the motions of it, is right now your interface has changed. Right now we've got a .flyweight something. And what you would do is you would add on the prototype for task .prototype. Let's say get priority, and you would return this .flyweight .priority so that you don't have to expose the fact that you're using a flyweight. You do everything with getters and setters, and the fact that you're using flyweights is not visible to you. All right, so that's the flyweight pattern. And I admit the flyweight pattern of the three we've looked at on the structural patterns is probably the least likely to be used, but when you need it, you need it. So if you're doing things with large data sets or you have many instances of an object, the flyweight pattern might be a good way for you to cut down on your memory overhead to help improve your performance.